what's up, everyone? Sam Shaw here from Wall Street Mastermind. I'm here today with another client interview for you guys. Today, I have Kevin on with me, and I'm excited to have Kevin on because Kevin just finished going through the summer 2021 recruiting process. Obviously, it was an interesting one with everything going on with COVID and all that good stuff, or not so good stuff, maybe. But regardless, Kevin was able to navigate through the entire process very successfully. In fact, got multiple offers, and so I wanted to get him on here to talk to you guys and share some of his experiences, and maybe give you guys some insight on how he was able to not only get one offer but get multiple offers. And so, Kevin, thank you for taking the time to talk to us today.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. So to start, I think what would be a good idea is maybe you could give people a quick introduction of just kind of like who you are, what type of candidate you are, coming into the recruiting process, and then we'll start from the beginning.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I am currently a junior at a liberal arts university in New England, and I'm double majoring in economics and math. Um, Coming into the process, I started working with Wall Street Mastermind during the fall of my sophomore year, so a few months before recruiting kicked off. And coming into the process, I was very new to the whole investment banking world, to the finance world. Didn't have any family members or really many friends that were interested or in the finance industry to begin with, let alone investment banking. Initially, I applied to college and came into my freshman year thinking I wanted to maybe major in history or study policy after college. So I actually interned after my freshman year at the state treasury in my home state, and learned a lot, but didn't really love the pace and the impact that I was having. So I started to learn more about finance, and as a result, started to be very compelled by investment banking. But again, didn't know much about the industry, and aside from that internship at the government, didn't really have much on my resume. So again, wasn't coming in with a lot a lot of meat on the bone when I was starting with Wall Street Mastermind.
Got it. Okay. So you had a internship with the state government. Is at the treasury, so I guess a little bit of exposure to finance, but not really like all that relevant for banking, basically.
Exactly. Yeah.
You also go to a liberal arts school, so it's not like you guys have. It's not like you go to Wharton or a school like that where your curriculum is heavily finance focused, and so you kind of just. And you didn't have any family or friends that you knew in the industry, so you kind of just you knew you were interested in banking, but you were kind of starting from scratch. It sounds like you have to figure everything out on your own.
Absolutely. Yeah. Starting from scratch.
Got it. Okay. And so what so I know you joined Launch Mastermind September of sophomore year. Like you said, it's a few months before recruiting started. What made you want to join a program like this?
Yeah. So I think I was starting, as you said, and as I had mentioned before, I had really no support or kind of information or track, and any role models to follow and mimic kind of throughout the process as I was preparing for recruiting. I had just started an internship that semester at a search fund, so I was definitely on the right track, and it was started to really develop my interest in the field as I got some relevant experience. And at that point, decided that I needed much more support, and and even if I felt that I was confident that I'd be able to get an offer and land a junior summer internship in investment banking, I definitely wanted to minimize the amount of stress that I have someone who's very experienced with the recruiting process, almost just as a soundboard to help quell all my stresses and confusion about the process.
Got it. Got it. So I take it there aren't a lot of students at your liberal arts school that are trying to get into banking, or do you guys have a lot of people trying to break in? Like, what's the environment like? Or did you have
Yeah.
a lot of friends you can kind of like help each other out with, or not really?
Yeah, so I actually none of my friends were interested in investment banking. I do have some now that I've met just kind of through the financial clubs.
Yeah.
But at my school, it's much more consulting focused or engineering focused. So I was definitely felt alone to an extent. And that was definitely a big reason for me. For my interest in Wall Street Mastermind. Not only to have Sam as a mentor, but also to have a community of kind of like-minded students.
Got it. Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, it's kind of, you talked about finance clubs and stuff like that. I kind of feel like Wall Street Mastermind is almost kind of like its own little finance club where
Absolutely.
everybody is. A lot of schools have those feeder clubs on campus that
Yeah,
send a lot of kids into banking. It's like we kind of have our own version of that, so to speak.
exactly. Exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
I guess I'm the club advisor in that sense. um, and so, like, did you have any like skepticism or doubt when you first like were deciding whether you want to join this program? Because it's not. I mean, like, we've been around for, I guess, what, 2.5 years now, maybe. But at least back when you joined, it only been around for a little more than a year, and
Right.
it's not this thing that a lot of people knew about yet, right? So, like, in a way, you were kind of like the what's the word I'm looking for? Like the first, like an early adopter, right? Like when there's like a new technology that comes out, when there's a like when the iPhone first came out, like everybody was still on dumb phones, and then like only
Right.
the most adventurous people were willing to go out and try the iPhone. It's kind of like that, right? Like, did you have any skepticism or doubt, or how are you kind of thinking about this?
Yeah, absolutely. I was skeptical and had a lot of doubt. I think the acceptance rate was kind of mind blowing for me, just
Yeah.
given the the statistics for the general application pool.
Yeah.
And but after talking with a couple of other students who had gone through the program very successfully, and then obviously after talking with you, I think it was pretty clear that the program was legitimate. And again, I think my biggest I wouldn't say necessarily doubt, but hesitation in joining the program was that I saw so many students. I shouldn't say so many, but I did see some students, from my own college. Even though there wasn't a ton of interest in investment banking, I did see some students, work at bulge bracket banks, elite boutique banks, and in my head it was almost like, why do I have to go through, they didn't use this program. If they were
Mm.
able to do it, I should be able to as well. But and I'm not saying that isn't the case, but I can say without a doubt that I had a much more smooth and less stressful process than a lot of those students, just because I had a greater idea of what the recruiting landscape actually looked like, and I had someone really kind of holding my hand through the process.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you mentioned a couple interesting points there, which we hear a lot. One is your success rate sounds too good to be true, right?
Right.
So we get that, which is, it's almost like a double-edged sword. It's like, obviously we want our success rate to be as high as possible, but sometimes when it's too high, people are like, are you lying to me, right?
Right.
And then the other part, and so we get it a lot. The other part is like, people say, well, I know so and so was able to get in on their own without doing the program, right?
Right.
Um, Now that you've gone through, and so those are very natural reactions, I would say. And I'm sure a lot of people that are listening now probably also have the same questions. Now that you've gone, and now that you've gone through the program, you're on the other side of having experienced the program. If you look back on this process that you just went through, um, did it make a big difference for you in terms of, like, if you hadn't come into this program, you had just done this all on your own, like, do you think you would have gotten the same outcome, or like what would have been the difference for you, if any?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I think the biggest difference, and I think the most obvious difference, is just time. I think I remember looking at breaking into Wall Street guides beforehand. An alumni had sent them to me, and I remember I had an interview for like a boutique, kind of like a regional boutique,
Mm.
in a couple of weeks. This is before I started the program, and just looking at the guides and feeling so intimidated. I didn't really know where to start. The accounting, accounting, which is the base of understanding all the technical concepts, made no sense to me the way they were explaining it. And I remember, watching the first videos of the technical series with Wall Street Mastermind, and almost just being so shocked. I didn't understand how how you were explaining the same things that they were explaining or attempting to explain in the guides. And I don't think that's no shade at all to the guides. I think they're great. I ended up definitely using them throughout the process, but they're far more useful after I had that base understanding, through Wall Street Mastermind. And so, so time number one, and then I think there are other very tangible points. I think and materials in the program that were so key. I know that for the bank that I'm working, going to be interning at next summer, I know that one of the reasons why I was able to interview when I did was because of a really great connection that I had made with a very senior banker. And I had a number of those connections made, kind of at a number of banks, and those connections ultimately led to offers. I know that my conversations that I had with them and the level of conversations that I had with them were very key in impressing them and strengthening those connections. And that's something I wouldn't have known or been able to do without the program. And then I think number two, and this seems small, but I can't emphasize this enough, that email template. I think you know what I'm talking about. It's like one of the, I think it's the third template number three. I got so like a ridiculous amount of responses and amazing feedback on that email template. It's just very unique, very well worded. I couldn't have come up with it myself, but I got so many really senior bankers, to get, I got them to get on the phone with me and ultimately, pull for me, because starting with that email template. So I think time overall and just less stress. I think those two things, those are probably the two biggest things
Mm.
that come with the program, at least for me. But I think there's so many other kind of seemingly smaller yet very tangible components of the program that are very helpful.
Got it. Got it. That makes sense. You talked about a lot of things there. I want to kind of like uh, dive into some of those things a little bit more. So on the technical side of things, you talked about the biggest difference is time, right? Like the difference between having us teach you these concepts versus you maybe just reading the Breaking Wall Street guides. Of course, you still use the guides in the end, but once you already had an understanding of the actual concepts, the guides became a lot more useful. Whereas
Right.
initially, I don't know how you're going about it, but most people, when they read those guides, they're kind of like reading the questions, they're reading the answers, and they're trying to
That's
memorize the
exactly right, man.
answers. And then, but they don't have like the foundational understanding that they need yet. And so the answers don't really make sense. And it's just almost like brute force memorization, which is not effective, right? Because
Right.
you're not going to get the exact questions in the interview. You're not going to get the exact questions that you happen to memorize, right?
Right.
Um,
Exactly.
I guess though, if like for someone that hasn't gone through the program yet, it's kind of hard to understand. Like, well, they do try to explain these concepts to you in the guides too,
Right.
right? Like it's just it's written, but they try to explain it in paragraph form or whatever.
Yeah.
Why is it that you felt like you were able to understand it better
Hmm.
through the way we taught it? Like, what's the main difference? Because they're teaching you the same concepts, right?
Yeah. I think number one, for me personally, videos are way better than the text. I think the text is, again, no shade of like Breaking Wall Street. I think they're great, but the text I found kind of confusing at times.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, just the organization.
And when you say videos, just to be clear, like what kind of videos are they? These aren't because these aren't like financial modeling videos, right? Because they have financial modeling videos also, right?
Right. They do.
In
They
fact,
do.
most video courses out there, I would say, are financial modeling courses.
Right,
Right.
exactly. And I think that like those are fine, those are great, but I needed to understand kind of the basic concepts before I could get into modeling, right?
Mm,
And again, you know, in some aspect, maybe for breaking into Wall Street and a number of other courses, those concepts might seem too basic to teach via video. But I think they're certainly confusing at first. And you know, your video kind of lecture style, which is almost similar to taking a class in school, and just watching a presentation, being able to pause it and take notes, was super helpful, like a game changer. And I think you know, even further, the ability to ask you literally directly, you know, the person who made the video and is teaching the course, you know, questions, examples, you know, to be able to hop on Zoom with you and go over something a concept that you had mentioned in the videos is huge. You know, a complete game changer. You can't do that with with Breaking into Wall Street. You can't do that with, you know, any of the other kind of YouTube, you know, IB or finance programs.
got it. So basically, I think the best way to explain it is like our videos is not like a financial modeling course. It's more like lecture style. It's almost like you could just think of it as you guys are taking an extra elective in school,
Exactly.
except this elective is just only teaches you all the technicals that you need to know for an investment banking interview.
Right.
And then essentially I'm the professor and I'm, whether it's drawing stuff up on the whiteboard or, going through a presentation and teaching everything conceptually. And then it's interactive, meaning if you guys have questions, you can either come to office hours and ask us in person, or we can hop on a Zoom call and talk about it, or even like we have a Slack channel where you can just drop your questions in there. And not only that, but I think getting to see the questions that other people are asking a lot of times is beneficial as well, because like you said, you not having a group of friends around you to study this stuff with, now all of a sudden you do. And a lot of times other people are asking questions that you didn't even think of. And then when you see their questions, you're like, oh, I need to know that too. And then so that also accelerates your learning as well, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah. I
like,
mean,
I mean, the difference is like, hey, would you rather learn by going to lecture? Like when you're at school, would you rather learn by going to lecture and going to office hours and talking to your professor and your TA and asking questions whenever you have questions? Or the alternative is like if you're just using a guide on your own, you buy a
right.
textbook and you just read the textbook at home and you never go to class
Right.
and you try to learn everything that way. One is going to be more efficient and probably more effective than the other, right? Like there's a reason why we pay so much money to go to school because otherwise we'll just all stay at home and read textbooks, right?
Exactly. Yeah. No, that's a great point. And I mean, you're still gonna have both, right? You're still gonna have the textbook too. I still, after I went through the Wall Street Mastermind modules, I still use some of the questions and breaking on the Wall Street as practice. So I mean, you're just like you said, you're literally getting a comprehensive course.
Yep, yep, yeah, that's great. And I think the other thing you mentioned that was huge for you was the networking piece,
Mm-hmm.
right? So obviously a lot of, like I said, you were able to get multiple interviews. I don't know how many interviews you had actually. I lost count. Do you remember how many firms you interviewed with?
I interviewed with, I know I had three, four, five. I think I had 7 super days.
So, okay. Yeah, so yeah, 7 super days. That's a lot, right? Like most people they'd be super happy to just even have one super day. But like you have 7 super days and you probably have even more first rounds than that, right?
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so to get so many interviews, that didn't just happen through like you submitting applications online, right? Like it's because I mean you go to a liberal arts school, you guys probably aren't really, well, you guys are what, maybe a semi-target, right? I would say, or what would you
We're
say?
target for like some like middle market firms, but not for any of the really big banks. We're a non-target. So networking
Okay.
was absolutely huge. Yeah.
Okay, so you're a non-target for the big firms, and
Yep.
then semi-target for, or you guys might be a target for some middle market firms, right?
Yep.
But coming from a school like that, for you to get so many interviews, that's
Right.
not that's not a given, right? Like the only way to like, if you were just applying with your resume or whatever, it's probably not happening, right?
Yep.
And so really it came down to networking. And not only did you network well, but look, a lot of times one popular question that we get from people is, I'm talking to a bunch of analysts and like they don't really seem to be able to help me, or they don't seem to have that much pull. Sounds like you were actually able to have a lot of success with the more senior folks.
Hmm.
And people are always asking, well, how do I get this? How do I get to the senior folks? And how do I get them to talk to me? And so you're saying like a lot of the stuff we taught you around networking, whether it's like what to say when you reach out, or also more importantly, once they agree to give you the time of day, because they're very, very busy, but once they agree to give you the time of day, like what you actually talk about with them, those are things that you wouldn't have been able to figure it out on your own.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I had before I started, Wall Street Mastermind, I had started reaching out uh, to mostly alumni on Wall Street, and I had, had conversations with analysts, of course. I did have some conversations with much more senior bankers who were alumni, and looking back on those conversations, I remember in the summer and even in the late spring, almost kind of kicking myself and saying, I wish that I had had those conversations after I started Wall Street Mastermind, so I could have had, made such a better impression. And they would have been much more, potentially much more helpful.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, I think the challenge that most people have in those conversations is, I'm guessing, I mean, you tell me, before Wall Street Mastermind, you probably looked some stuff online in terms of, oh, okay, I need a network. This is, probably these are some questions that I can ask. And then people always have just like a list of canned questions that they prepare. And then every single banker they get on the phone with, they just go through this list of questions that they've
right.
already predetermined ahead of time. It's like, oh, so how did you get to where you are today? Like,
Right.
what is the day to day like for an investment banker or whatever, right? And then it's not. It doesn't really feel like a conversation. It's almost more like an interrogation,
Yeah.
almost, right? And
Yeah.
then the banker on the other side, they've heard these questions hundreds of times from all these different students, and they're bored, right, with this conversation. And then also at the end of it, like, first of all, it doesn't really usually result in anything. Like, you're not, ultimately what you want is the referral,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
So if those questions aren't leading to the referral, one, it's a waste of time, and two, honestly, after three, four, five of these conversations, they start to all sound the same, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So then it's like, what am I even doing? Like, why am I still doing this? And this is
Right.
why, like, we talk to students, and a lot of times students will tell us, oh yeah, I've done a lot of networking. And I'll ask them, well, how many people have you spoken to? It's like, oh, I've spoken to like 15 or 20 bankers.
Yeah.
And then I'll laugh, but I know why it feels like a lot to them, because they've had like 15 to 20 conversations that were all the same, and they weren't really learning anything new anymore.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Um, but you know that like when we go through the networking process, like, I mean, I don't know how many people you end up speaking to, but it's probably a lot more than that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And probably every single firm, you say you got like whatever 7 super days, and probably a bunch more first rounds. Every single firm that you had interviews from, my guess is you had probably had at least one really good conversation
Uh,
with at least one person at that firm, if not more, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely more. I think there's one super day that I had, and I had applied to that bank, but I actually hadn't applied to that office. But I had a really great conversation with the senior banker there, and he essentially got me into the interview process at his office, and I hadn't even applied.
Mm.
Uh, so I mean that to me ended up that was one of the first processes that I was in, and that kind of blew my mind just to the power of networking. That I could, you know, get a super day at a bank I didn't or office I didn't even apply to.
Wow.
Um, but yeah, I think understanding how to build a connection instead of just reading off of the informational interview guide kind of script was huge. It was huge.
Right, because the way we teach you guys how to do networking, we don't give you like a script, right? We don't say, hey, here's a list of questions, ask these questions, and you'll be fine, because then that's too rigid, right?
Right.
But I
It's not
think
a
what we give you is more of a framework of like, hey, here's what you should be thinking about to each conversation, and this is how it should generally flow, so that there's a progression from going from being a total stranger at the beginning of a 30-minute conversation to by the end, there are certain things that should have happened to get them to basically like you, right? Basically, the goal is to get them to proactively refer you, like this example you just gave, where this you didn't even apply, and the senior banker got you an interview with his office. That's what
Yep.
you want, right? Because you're not asking these people to refer you, right? Because if you ask them, then I mean that's bad etiquette. First of all, you shouldn't do that. But how do you get them to just proactively help you, like what you described there? Because if you can do that, then that's when you're going to get a bunch of interviews coming in, right?
Right. Yeah, and that's definitely something I struggled with before, just understanding how do I turn this conversation that I had, a phone call that I had into, hopefully a referral and an interview, because I definitely didn't want to ask and I didn't know how to phrase it any other way.
Right.
Those first few calls weren't, didn't really amount to much.
Right. And
Wasn't finished.
actually, I mean, a big part of not having to ask, and a big part of like getting the banker to proactively offer, is that it also comes back to how you're answering their questions, right? It's
Exactly.
not like everyone's always so worried about like, what questions should I be asking them, but part of the networking conversation, they're also asking you questions about you because they're
Right.
trying to get to know you and they're evaluating you. It's almost like they're interviewing you, but just in a more casual way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so a lot of it also comes back to how you answer your behavioral questions, for example,
Right.
right? Like
Absolutely.
I'm gonna ask you to tell them about you, to walk them through the experiences you have on your resume. They're gonna want to know like, hey, well, why do you want to do banking, or why are you interested in our firm, or whatever it may be, right? And so that's the part that a lot of people also aren't really thinking about. A lot of times when they think of networking, they just think, oh, it's networking. But it has a lot of overlap with
Yeah.
even your behaviorals and sometimes even your technicals. Like you probably have some networking conversations where the bankers start grilling you on your technical knowledge, right? Just like turning it into an interview on the spot. And if you're not prepared for that, then pretty much they're not going to help you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, the story was huge. I think I said I walked through kind of my story or elevator pitch in every single kind of networking call that I had, and every senior banker would always ask me that, or why invest in banking. And if I didn't have that prepared and really down, those connections never would have really amounted to anything. Those conversations wouldn't have gone well.
Yeah. And so like what on the behavioral side though, just to spend a couple minutes on that, like a lot of people have trouble understanding like, well, I mean, how much can you really do on the behavioral side? Because isn't it just as simple as, hey, let me go look up a list of the most common behavioral questions, and I'm gonna go and think about what I want to say to these questions, and then I'll just practice that answer as many times as possible and memorize it, and then that's it. Like, I mean, what else is there to do there? Like, what do we actually do with you on the behavioral side that actually made a difference for you? Why can't you just do that on your own?
Right. Yeah. I think that I mean, just having feedback on your behavioral answers is huge, especially because for me, I didn't just prepare, like kind of the three classic, answers to tell me about yourself, why banking, why our bank. There were so many of those kind of situational questions, so many market focus or deal focus questions that I was preparing for, and to be able to get feedback on every single one of those was absolutely enormous. And in my experience, I didn't, and I'll preface this by saying that I didn't interview at many of the elite boutique banks, which I know tend to be more technically focused, but most of my interviews were behaviorally focused, from kind of first round to super day, and the technical stuff is very important. But I think something that you highlight a lot is that to an extent at least, your answer is either going to be right or wrong. Whereas with the behavioral questions, just the range of possibilities and how great or not great your answer can be is just so much larger. That's how you ultimately can get the offer, I
Yep.
think.
Yep. No, absolutely. So I think what you're saying there is just, hey, on the technical side, uh, you either have the right answer or you don't. in a way that almost makes it easier because there's only so much you need to know. Right? Like once you know you
Right.
learn those concepts, you're like, I'm good on that. I'll be fine. On the behavioral side, because there's no right or wrong answer, sometimes if you're not getting the feedback, um, it can get frustrating where you don't even really know what else there is to work on. But let's
Right.
say like you start going through some interviews or you start going through these networking calls or networking coffee chats or whatever, and you're just not getting the referral or you're just not passing the interviews. But you're also not getting any feedback from your interviewer. Like they're not going to tell you like, hey, like your story needs to be better this way or that way or whatever. And then so now you're kind of like, well, what am I doing wrong? Like,
Absolutely.
where am I going to stuck? And that's a bad place to be in because what if you get another interview after that? Now what do?
Yep.
You start to second guess yourself. Like, should I use the same story that I had last time? Or
Right.
but that didn't really work. Well, was it that story that didn't work, or was it my answer to the other question? And then like,
Right.
if I need to change something, like what should I change? Because now you're starting to just like trial and error and experiment, but these are like actual interview opportunities, and you might not get that many interview opportunities.
Right. Right.
Right? And so you don't
Exactly.
want to be experimenting with that. Um, and I think the hardest part about behaviorals is like if you try to critique your own behavioral answers, if you try to give yourself feedback, it's almost impossible to do because you were the one that came up with the answer in the first
Right.
place. How are you supposed to know what you're doing wrong? Right.
Right.
So the way we give you guys feedback is because we've seen at this point, we've seen hundreds of different students and how they answer these questions. In fact, because we work on their answers with them, right? Just like we did with
Right.
them. And then obviously everyone has different answers, right? However, what we could do is we could look at all the students who had the most successful outcomes, right? All the students that got into the bulge bracket and their lead boutique banks. We know exactly how they answer their questions. We can then compare all those answers. Like we have a lot of data, right? We can compare the
Right.
answers
Exactly.
and see like, hey, what are the commonalities between these answers, right? Not
Right.
necessarily like that they have the exact stories, but like there's certain elements to their stories or the way they structure their answers or what are the qualities that they're highlighting, and then that clues us in to what these bankers are actually looking for, right? Because at the end of the day, that's what it is on the behavioral side. Is like there are certain things that bankers are looking for. You're just not quite sure what that is, but you don't want to guess. Right? You want to be as
Absolutely.
scientific as you can about it. And now, if we identify these commonalities, we can again turn that into a framework that you can then apply to your own stories and examples.
Right.
And that's what's going to allow you to be a lot more successful, whether it's in your networking conversations or your actual interviews, right? And
Right.
like you said, a lot of times that's even more important than the technicals, especially probably my guess is for you coming from a liberal arts background, liberal arts school, they tend to go a little bit easier on the technical side, right? Because the expectation is not that you haven't taken all these classes. You still have to answer those questions, but they care more about the fit, right?
Exactly.
They could
Yep.
teach you. They could teach you all the technicals once they hire you. That's not hard, right? But they can't change who you are as a person.
Right.
Um,
Yep. Exactly.
so obviously, you put in a ton of hard work. You networked a bunch. You fixed your technicals, your behaviorals. Like you said, you got a bunch of interviews. One thing I thought would be helpful for people to talk about is like, because you got multiple offers along the way,
Yeah. Yeah. I think I
right?
had six. All but one of the super days I had offers.
So yeah, 6 out of 7 offers, right? Which is amazing, by the way. It's like very, very rare that people get more offers than rejections. But um, how long was the gap between like your first offer and your last offer? Do you remember like how many months?
Yeah. It was maybe 5 weeks. Five between 4 and 6 weeks. So it was
Okay.
pretty tight. Actually, you know what? It was less than that. I think it was exactly 4 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was busy. That that month was very busy.
And your first offer, if I remember correctly, like I think your first offer was like with like a middle market bank or something, right?
Yeah. Go to market. Like exactly, like a balance sheet type of
Yeah.
market. Yep.
And like you weren't really satisfied with that. I mean, you were happy to have an offer, but you weren't really
That's right.
satisfied with that, right?
Right.
So the tricky part is most of these offers, they're not going to give you 4 weeks to decide, right?
No,
Because they
absolutely
have
not.
to, they have other candidates that they've interviewed that are on the wait list. Like if you say no, they're going to move down to the next person and give them an offer, right?
Mm.
So like, how do you manage that? Like, how do you navigate through that entire process?
Yeah, that was super tricky and super super stressful. But and you know, obviously, I was kind of I was asking, hitting your line so often just for advice on how to navigate that. Um, and you know, for me, it worked out very well. Just in terms of it was almost like I was riding a wave of kind of offers. I get one, then right before it expired, fortunately, I get another one, and it pushed me over until I found one that I was really, really happy with. There were certainly times. I think there was one time where I was I turned down, and I had two offers at hand, and the one that was expiring sooner, I was actually more excited about. But I really wanted to, to have the opportunity to interview at some, even greater banks, banks that I liked even more down the line. So I remember deciding whether or not to take that risk and decline the offer that I liked slightly more. And I think it just came down to a confidence thing. And I know that I wouldn't have the same type of confidence in just my ability to get an offer I was really happy about if it weren't for the program. And just kind of I think obviously having confidence with my behavioral answers first and foremost, with my technical abilities, but I think also just I think this is something that's super super underrated. And we touched on it earlier, was just having like the strength of the wolf pack and having this, like you mentioned, kind of finance club, like intercollegiate finance club, just because summer 2020 when recruiting was such a mess with COVID.
Yeah.
But kind of having the support and all the information that I had from that group, plus the confidence that I was able to build through the program was huge and helping me kind of navigate that 1 month period where I was kind of managing all of those interviews.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I think you talked about a couple of things there that are really helpful for people. Like if I were to summarize, um, one, it helped that you had multiple offers in hand, right? Because like initially you had those two offers, which made it easier for you to turn down the one that was exploding earlier because even
Right.
though that the offer you let explode was better than the second offer you had, but at least worst case scenario, you knew if nothing else came along, you still had that offer, right?
Exactly.
And then once you turn down, but the other thing that you have to do when you're deciding whether to let an offer explode too is you're basically just doing a risk reward analysis of like how much upside is there if I continue to interview?
Right.
What interviews do I still have coming up? And then what is the probability of me getting those offers? That comes back to what you said about your confidence level, right? So you're gonna probability weight the outcome of like how likely is it that I can get a better offer? How likely is it that I don't get a better offer? And do I think that risk reward profile is favorable? And if you think that it's much more likely that you will get a better offer, then you probably want to take that shot, right?
Absolutely.
And
Yep.
so you did because one, you felt confident with your interviewing abilities, both on the behavioral and technical side, and two, um, obviously having better interviews lined up,
Right.
that's not a given either. And you had, I guess, what, like four other interviews still
Yeah.
left.
Yeah. Well, they were trickling in. There, I didn't actually have. I think when I rejected that one, I had like one super day coming up. Um, but it
You
was
were
just
just waiting for that one, but like you said, it was kind of like riding a wave where
exactly.
you went to that one and you got that offer. Now you have a little bit more time. But then while you're waiting
Exactly.
for that, you got another super day, and then you got another super day, and that just kept happening basically.
Exactly. Exactly. Yep.
But actually, that didn't just happen too. It was like, I think if I remember correctly, basically anytime you got an offer, you had to
I
you could
did. Yeah.
you had to like basically figure out how you can leverage that to get maybe like your some of your interviews at the other firms accelerated. right?
Yep, absolutely. And I mean, accelerating is always hard. I think especially for some of the top banks, I found it was just difficult. Even if I had, people pushing for me to accelerate, I think with COVID too, it made it even tougher probably. But that I think just goes back to the power of the network. I know for a fact that, for the bank that I'm going to be in next summer, I know that, one of the reasons why they accelerated for me a bit, or at least got me into the first batch of Super Days and higher views was because, I had some really great connections that were very senior and were able to push for me. So it was again kind of a culmination of all the different factors that came with through the program that helped me get that kind of final offer.
Yeah.
But I think again it was the just kind of the confidence that I had built throughout the program, and then just the understanding of the landscape that I wouldn't have had if I didn't do the program.
Yeah, I mean, that's great points. Like when you're accelerating, typically, first of all, a lot of these firms, they don't care if you have another offer if they don't think that other offer is kind of on par with their
Right.
firm, right? Like if you say, "Oh, I have an offer from this like middle market bank," and then you're trying to get a bulge bracket bank to move up for you, or elite boutique bank to move up for you. A lot of times they're very snobby about it, and they're like, like we don't care, right? And so it's
Exactly.
almost like the offer has to be close enough, but then even then, just logistically, it's inconvenient for them to like have to
Right.
move things around for you and just make exceptions for you. And if they did that for everybody, it would be a mess. But they'd be more likely to do that for you if, hey, someone really senior at the firm was like, no, 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 we gotta
Right.
interview this guy. We can't let
Exactly.
him go to our competitor because we need him to work here, right? Like, I mean, having that is sometimes literally the difference between whether you get that interview accelerator or not, which then determines whether you even have a chance to interview. Because if you couldn't get accelerated, then at some point you might have just taken whatever offer you had,
Right. I
right?
would have.
Um, and that goes back to your point at the very beginning, which is like, hey, well, there are people that got offers on their own without ever using Wall Street Mastermind, right? And I
Right.
always tell people, I'm not saying that's not possible, right? But I mean, we will never know what would have happened in an alternate universe. But what if those people had used Wall Street Mastermind? If they had
Right.
gotten offers on their own, could they have gotten an even better offer?
Oh
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah.
most likely, right? And people are like, well, who cares? As long as you get an offer, I get an offer. Well, it still kind of matters, right? Because like
Right.
if you had ended up with your middle market offer that you got first versus the bulge bracket offer that you ultimately got, like let's say who knows what you're going to do in the future, but let's say if you decide I want to go into private equity or I want to go to a hedge fund, or a lot of banking analysts do want to do
Hmm.
that, right? That could literally be the difference between you ending up at a mega fund versus you ending up at a middle market fund, which
Right.
believe it or not, like that's your third year out of college because you do 2 years as a banking analyst. Your third year out of college, if you're at a mega fund, you might be making $100,000 more than your friend who's working at a middle market fund. Using
Right.
the same
Yeah.
analyst class as you, just at a different bank, right?
Yeah.
And so, is that a big deal? Yeah, I would say that's a pretty big deal, right? Like, so I always encourage people is like, don't just think of it as like, well, could I do this on my own? Maybe you can, maybe you can't. But one, it's a probability thing.
Right.
Even if you think there's a chance that you could do it on your own, you would rather have a much higher chance of that happening. And then
Yep.
second of all, it's also like even if you could do it on your own, how good of a bank can you get in? Can you get into an even better bank, right?
Definitely. Definitely.
So that
Yeah. And
that affects you for the rest of your career.
absolutely. And I think and I heard this I remember when I was still talking to, before I joined the program, I heard this from you. I heard this from the students that I talked to that had gone through the program. Just thinking about the price and cost of the program, um, given the success rate that you have, and, almost knowing that you have, a very, very high chance of getting into the industry, if you're working with Wall Street Mastermind, that the difference between, you working at, kind of like a tier one bank over a tier two bank, is, so like just as you'd mentioned about kind of the exit opportunities, right? I mean, it's so worth it.
Yeah,
It's a great investment. So,
yeah,
um, it's not just kind of like you mentioned, just breaking in. It's very nuanced. And
yeah.
yeah,
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, I think the key word there is investment, right? Like you view this as an investment. It wasn't a cost. It was like, I'm gonna invest in myself. I'm gonna get
right,
myself a much better outcome. And it's gonna pay like a huge return down the road, right? Or really for the rest of your career, really. And so a smart thing to do. So ultimately, like, are you comfortable telling people like where you'll be going? Like, what was that final offer that you ended up getting after
yeah,
all?
yeah, yeah. So I'll be at Bank of America next summer.
Gotcha.
Excited for.
Yeah, so I mean, that's a great firm, right? It's up there. It's definitely one of the better bulge bracket banks out there, and so that's amazing, man. And so I know we've already given people so much good advice just from all the things you've been saying. Um, if I were to ask you for just like one last piece of advice that you have for people, maybe like one piece of advice that you wish someone had told you back when you were first starting to go through this process, like what's something that you know now that
Mhm.
you wish you had known back then, or what's something that you would tell the version of Kevin, 12,
Yeah,
14 months ago? Is there
yeah.
anything like that that you would want to tell people?
I would, and I know we emphasize this so much, but we emphasize networking, talk about it a lot. But I would treat networking almost as just in the same way you would work on your technical skills, just almost in the same ways you would work on your behavioral answers. I think networking deserves its kind of own spot, not only in terms of dedicating time to get on phone calls, but dedicating time to come up with really thoughtful answers, to really prepare for those conversations, and work on that as a skill, just as you would kind of the technical or behavioral interview question prep.
Got it. That's great advice, man. And look, it's not even just from us making recruiting. Now that you've gotten good at networking, that's honestly a skill that you
So
probably going to use for the rest of your life, right? Like they always say, like it's not about what you know, it's about who you know.
yep,
It'll only become the case more and more so as you get older, as you progress further in your career, as you become more senior. That's just a life skill, right?
right.
That you'll continue to benefit from. So that's a great piece of advice, man. So look, for everyone that's still listening, I think, man, I have so many takeaways from this conversation. But if I were to really sum it up for you guys, a couple of things that stood out to me. One, um, even if you go to maybe a non-target school, even if you come from a liberal arts background, maybe even if you don't really have that much relevant experience coming into the process, um, if you're not in the right environment, even like you don't have families or friends or classmates who are trying to do this, um, the way to overcome that is to put yourself in the right environment, right? Like if you surround yourself with other like-minded individuals, with mentors and peers who are all kind of trying to accomplish the same thing or can help you accomplish this thing, then that's going to make a huge difference for you, right? Because rather than trying to figure everything out on your own, you can actually like have somewhere to go to just ask questions anytime you have questions. You get feedback 24/7 anytime you need, right? Whether it's on your technicals, your behaviorals, your networking. And one, it's a lot less stressful because now you know that even anytime you get stuck, you'll always have somewhere to go. But two, it's a lot more efficient, right? Because
Hmm.
recruiting happens so quickly. Um, if you're going about this the slow way or doing a lot of trial and error or experimentation, you may or may not get there, right? You may or may not become good enough at all of these things in the amount of time that you have, right? Like Kevin
Right.
said, like you have to really, even for something like networking, you really need to dedicate an equal amount of time to that, to preparing for that, than you do for technicals and for behaviorals, right? And I feel like a lot of students nowadays, they dedicate most of their time to learning the technicals, very little time to learning the behaviorals, and probably even less time on the networking, right?
Hmm.
And that's why so many of those students, like, it's not working out for them because they only have one piece of the puzzle, right? but you need all the pieces for this to work out. And then also not just work out, but like, what is your definition of success? Is your definition of success just, hey, I'm just happy to be here. I just want to get in somewhere. As long as I'm working at a bank, then I'm good. Or is it like, hey, no, I want to live up to my fullest potential. I want to get the best outcome I can possibly get. I'm not satisfied with just barely getting by, or maybe I get it, maybe I don't. And not only do I want to get in, I want to get into the best banks. I want to have the most prestigious banks. I want to have the highest compensation. I want to have the best exit opportunities. Like, you deserve to have all of those things, right? But they're not just going to happen. You have to do the things that you need to do to make it happen, right? And it's easier said than done, and that's kind of what we're here for, right? Is to help you with that process. And we've helped hundreds of students with that process at this point, and so we know what we're doing. So if that's something that you're looking for, I just want to encourage you guys to. You can start by scheduling a free strategy session with our team. Basically, what we'll do is we'll hop on the phone with you and talk to you and learn more about your situation. Like, what are your goals? What kind of banks are you trying to get into? What challenges are you currently having? What do you feel like is maybe potentially preventing you from getting there? And then together, we'll help you come up with a game plan to address those challenges, or at a minimum, just give you some advice on what to do. Whether you do it on your own or with us doesn't really matter. But I would start there, right? And then if it's a good fit, obviously, and you want to work with us, then we're happy to work with you. And if not, that's okay too, right? So if that's something that you're interested in, you can go to www.wallstreetmastermind.com/apply. The street's abbreviated to ST, so it's stmastermind.com/apply. Excuse me. And just pick a time that's available on our calendar that works for you, and we'll hop on. We'll have this conversation with you, and I think you'll find it to be a very valuable conversation at a minimum, right? And it'll just help you make some progress in your recruiting process. So that's pretty much it, guys. Kevin, again, I want to thank you for taking an hour of your time out of your day to talk to us. I know you're pretty busy with school, and so we appreciate you for coming on and providing so much insight to other people that are just now starting to go through the process. And super happy for you, man, with the outcome that you're able to get. Obviously, you worked super hard for it over the last, a year plus, right? And so you deserve it. And we look forward to seeing what you accomplish going forward, man.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's my pleasure. All right, guys, that'll be it for today. And we'll be back, as always, with more of these in the near future for you guys, okay? Talk to you guys soon.